So hi everyone, and welcome to the JPOMA webinar where we'll be going through the various City of Johannesburg tariffs and how they would affect our market within the inner city. Before we do that, we've got Michelle Dickens here from TPN again. Thank you, Michelle, so much for always giving up your time to give us an update on these very important figures. For those of you who don't know, Michelle is the Managing Director and founder of TPN. TPN has been in existence since the year 2000, and they are a specialist property credit bureau, specializing as well and focusing on education. So there's huge amounts of information on their website, lots of free stuff as well, which we love. But now I'll hand it over to Michelle. And Michelle, if you can give us an update on the latest rental collections within our JPOMA territory. Thank you.
Wow, thanks Angela, and thanks for the JPOMA team. It's such fun to come and share your data with you on a monthly basis. I'm thoroughly enjoying it, and also to share new data that we're publishing to the market today. So you're first to see it, and that's in terms of the vacancy survey data and the Q2 finalized Q2 data, and then of course we'll give you some insights as to what we're seeing in August so far from a collection perspective. But if I can also send a shout out to all the JPOMA members to thank you for sharing your vacancy survey data with us. Angela, your forwarding on of the survey and getting the JPOMA members to submit information has been phenomenal, and we've seen a huge uptick in the last couple of quarters with the JPOMA submission. So I think you're going to get some value out of today's session. Right, so moving swiftly along, just to remind everyone, this is the JPOMA area as TPN has identified it through discussions with your members. So this is when I say this is what the JPOMA member area looks like in terms of the rent collections. These are the areas that I've taken into consideration in terms of that ultimate output. So let's talk about rent collections in Q2 and good standing rates. And I want to remind everyone quickly what good standing is to TPN in terms of our definition. A tenant in good standing is a tenant who has settled their account in full, meaning all the arrears that they had on their account, balances brought forward, plus the current month's rent, plus any additional charges. So your electricity, sewage, refuse, rates and taxes, whatever you pass on to the tenant, those charges need to be settled by month end. The green line is the residential market, and this is what I've been sharing with you on a monthly basis. So coming into lockdown, 81.5% at this point here, 81.5% of tenants being in good standing with their rent. And in Q2, remember, I've been sharing 76% of tenants in good standing in April, 71.9% of tenants in good standing in June, 72% in July. Ultimately, when we wrap that data up together, it gives us a figure of 73.5% of tenants in good standing for Q2 for residential tenants nationally around the country. Not as bad as a global financial crisis in 2008, 2009, which bottomed out at 71. But, big but here, the recovery is not going to be quick. It's going to be long and slow, and we might even have a W. It might even be a double down. So that's where we are at the moment. From a commercial perspective, oh my sweet soul, right? 50.36% of commercial tenants in good standing for Q2. And you can see it's plummeted from 77%. And this is because retail tenants are sitting at 45% in good standing. Office tenants are sitting at 66% of tenants in good standing. And industrial tenants are sitting at 58% of tenants in good standing. And this is because, yes, there might be a recovery in tenants starting to pay more towards their current rent as we move forward, but these tenants still have a lag. They still have a history of arrears, and those arrears are not being brought up to date yet. Although I must say for August, we're starting to see a little bit more of a recovery for the commercial sector than we are for the residential sector. And when I say a little bit, I literally mean like 1%. So don't get excited. It's literally not a lot. Okay, so let's before I share JPOMA, I'm just going to give some more perspective, and that's by provinces. So this is Q2 data by province. You can see Gauteng. I'm sorry, guys. Look at the Western Cape. They managed to stay above 80% in good standing in lockdown quarter. Eastern Cape deteriorated a little bit to 79%, but look at Gauteng, 71% of tenants in good standing in Gauteng. Carnage in the below 3,000 rand levels. 63% of tenants in good standing in the below 3,000 rand rentals. 60% of tenants in good standing. That's down here somewhere. It's not even on this graph, if I were to graph it. 60% of tenants in good standing in the above 25,000 rand category. Not your market. Not your market, I understand. Still carnage nevertheless. So this is JPOMA. Here we were, the 81.5% in quarter 1, coming into lockdown. As I said, April 76%, June 71.9%, July 72%. 73, and here we are in August. As of, we've got 1 week left to collect, and we're sitting at 66%. To put this in perspective, this is a little bit better than where it was same time in July, in June, and in April. So slight improvement. I guess we're going to finish at least 73, but maybe 73.5. Maybe there's a little bit of improvement there. JPOMA, where are you sitting? A little bit below the national average. You can see how the wheels fell off much more within your area, and that's because of those below 3,000 rand tenants. Really, when I say they're sitting at 63% in good standing nationally, is really not looking good. A little bit of a recovery there in June and July, and currently we're sitting on 46%. Remember, as people are getting paid now, their salaries are coming in now, we're going to start to see people pay more towards their August salaries, and we'll deal with September come the 1st of September. Okay, so some more data to show you. These are the vacancy rates. Up to 11.4% nationally. It's the highest vacancy that we've got on record that we've been doing in the last 4 years. So 11.4% in terms of vacancies nationally. How does that relate to provincially? Gauteng, actually not as bad as some of the other provinces. KwaZulu-Natal sitting at 13%, the 5 smaller provinces sitting at nearly 14%, and Gauteng sitting pretty close there to the national average. What does it translate to on a per area basis? Because that's what you're keen to see, right? Oh, Randburg, 18%, Sandton, 19%, Soweto, 19%. These are all moving into some of those, Sandton certainly moving into some of those higher end, more luxury properties, and people are definitely downscaling. So there's definitely a shift, and I'll show you it in the market strength survey that I want to show you. There's definitely a shift of people wanting to downscale. And Joburg, not too bad, sitting at 11.3% vacancies. Remember, coming off 9% last month. So all in all, I guess the scary part about vacancies is the tenants that are not paying, where eviction orders have been granted and there's a stay on execution, or where the execution now in level 2 is being stayed until the end of the state of national disaster, which, as you know, is a moving goalpost, and we don't know when that is. So I guess you would rather have a vacancy than having a tenant that's not paying, where you've got no opportunity to execute on your eviction order.
Sure, so is this purely those last 2 graphs? Those are for Resi only, yeah?
Yes, this is Resi only, 100%.
Okay, thank you.
The only commercial conversation that I've had in here was just to show what the good standing ratio was in relation to residential. And then we've got the market strength index. So what we have here, this is a combination of the demand rating and the supply rating. You'll see, folks, I'm going to send out, literally, when I finish on this webinar, I'm going to send out the full vacancy survey. And in that survey, in the results, which you'll get, you'll see the demand ratings and the supply ratings, which is fascinating, because the combination of the demand, is there over demand or oversupply, results in what is changing, what is causing the change in the market strength index itself. And you can see the market strength index equilibrium is here at 50. So anything above 50 shows a market where there is demand, and anything that sits below 50 shows a market where there is excess supply. So right now, the market strength is sitting at 41.3. is down from 46. It's down from 49 the quarter before in quarter one. So you can see, so this is quarter 3 data. I must stress, this is quarter 3 data. It was done now. So you can see that there is excess supply with less demand, because people without an income, tenants without an income, they have no ability to go and apply for rentals. And the only area that we're seeing, so this is Gauteng sitting at 39, so well below even the national average, 39. And the only area that we saw where there was an improvement in quarter 3 on the market strength was in the below 3,000 Rand category. And what does that mean? It means that there's a lot of tenants that are downscaling, a lot of tenants where the demand is increasing in that market. But as you know, with only 63% of those tenants in good standing, it's a lot higher risk, with a lot higher risk applications, and I fear a lot more rejections, which is probably driving demand, because as a tenant gets rejected from one property, they apply at multiple landlords or property managers looking for their application to be taken up. That's me. Are there any questions? Can I stop sharing?
Yeah. So there's no questions coming in from our members, but I was just wondering, because I kind of find it quite fascinating that the Cape provinces are doing so much better. Do you have any indication of why compared to us?
So the Cape provinces have always done really, really well. What I can share about the Cape provinces at the moment, and this is data that's literally we've been working on for the last week, are the escalations. And so the escalations in the Western Cape have plummeted. They are they're pretty close to negative escalations at the moment. And I guess that's one of the reasons that would motivate a tenant from an affordability perspective to be able to continue to afford their rental. I actually just want to share, because I did ask the team, the data team, to give me the escalations for Gauteng, because I think it's important. Are we going to hit negative escalations? So coming into the lockdown, so quarter 1, and we know the escalations have been low for a long time. The escalations were sitting 3% for Gauteng. In quarter 2, the escalations deteriorated to 2.3%, and preliminary, because the quarter's not finished, but preliminary escalations for quarter 3 for Gauteng are sitting at 1%. Where we have seen negative escalations already in quarter 3, the preliminary data is in the above 12,000 Rand category, and that makes absolute sense, because people are literally bailing out of those properties. We've had 50% loss of market share of market in the above 25,000 Rand properties. In other words, 50% of properties that were available and were tenanted have been cut. They're not tenanted.
Michelle, Andrew Schaefer here, just a question for you. So it's my observation that in the commercial sector, there was a lot of credits passed because businesses couldn't trade, they were closed, and obviously had zero revenue attached to that. That didn't happen in the residential sector because, generally the units were tenanted and there was beneficial occupation. But, many inner city tenants now do not have the sort of resources or the capacity to catch up, the months of rental when they weren't working, etc. So the big question is, kind of crediting rentals to keep them as tenants, help them get up to date, and recognize their sort of, their efforts to pay current rentals based on their resumed earnings. So the question is, there's a lot of bad debt sort of absorbed in those good standing figures, which could work through the system based on, write-offs or credits, which are incentives to encourage, certain resident tenants in goods, that were up to date before lockdown to pay.
100%, Andrew. So you're absolutely correct. The good standing of commercial tenants, I must point out, includes all write-offs. So when we're collecting the data and we're looking at the data from our client base, and I also want to point out that the data has not shrunk in size. So it's not that we have a smaller sample, it's 180,000 commercial tenants that data is involved in that data assessment. And the data coming through, so we stay quite close to our commercial property owners listed REITs, etc. And we've already seen rental reversions on the accounting software. So the good standing ratio of 50% includes rental reversions that have been allocated to those accounts. In terms of the residential, Andrew, I 100% agree with you. If you have a tenant who still has an income right now, who lost their income and now has their income again, and came into hard times during the lockdown legitimately and is unable to cash out, because honestly, once you've lost your income, it's not like the next month when you regain your income, you regain it plus what you lost. No, you're just going to get it going forward. And everyone runs very close to their budgets. To hold on to a good quality tenant at this stage and to say we rather take a knock on the arrears, I think at this stage would be a smart solution.
And Michelle, sorry, last question. How does exactly that issue affect their credit score? Because as you said now, much higher percentage of applications are being declined because of worse credit scores. But, you know, implicit in that is that a lot of people lost their income. They're not in good standing. It's affecting their score, but one understands the predicament. And hopefully that will recover to some extent now that they, you know, hopefully back at work. So, you know, is there some sort of adjustment that should be made on the credit scores for exactly that point?
Yes, most definitely. So TPN absolutely wants accurate information. When we released the rental recovery documents, we made a recommendation that when those documents were signed, so the tenant had the opportunity to submit their loss of income application, and based on that loss of income application, rent deferment agreements were entered into. Where those rent deferment agreements have been entered into, the property management system accounting data needs to reflect the agreement between the parties. 100% absolutely. And the same argument or the same processes were followed at the SACRA data hub. In other words, if somebody entered into an agreement with their credit providers in terms of a holiday on their home loan or their car finance or whatever, the data coming into the data hub in terms of those credit agreements reflected such agreements. So 100% in terms of any arrangement, legitimate legal arrangement where you have contracted with the tenant to say, as a result of your loss of earnings, and we verified the loss of earnings and we're comfortable that we're not being taken for a ride, this is the agreement that the arrangement that we're going to make, and if that arrangement includes a reversion of rent for previous periods, then that gets allocated to the accounting software, property management system, and that then gets fed through to the TPN credit card.
Thanks.
Pleasure.
Okay, great. We don't have any other questions that have come through. So thank you so much, Michelle. And I will distribute your presentation as well. I'll wait for your other data as well. I'll send it all out together. Okay. Thank you so much. And as I said,
sorry, sorry, Angela, just quickly, Michelle, I just wanted to say thank you very much, man. The information is amazing, and we're very grateful to have you putting it out to everyone.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Yes. Bye. Okay, so now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of what this webinar is about. So welcome to the official graveyard shift. I know it's a Friday afternoon and we'd all rather be drinking our wine now that we can. But I think this is a very important webinar. Just to give you a bit of information, the presentation that you are about to see is very detailed and very complicated. I've tried to include as many of the tariffs as possible, but we will be focusing on the ones that are specific to JPOMA and our membership. So I'm hoping that this document that we've put together will be something that you can use as a reference document in the future. One of the things that I picked up while working on it is there are some discrepancies about the tariffs that have been published. So this document is as accurate as we can get it based on the information that we have. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Peter Deane. Peter Deane has been a utility specialist for 10 years. He was the utility specialist for Redefine, handling their national industrial portfolio. and was recruited by UTF 2 years ago, where he's their utilities manager. He's been extremely successful in resolving UTF's historical and current issues. In my opinion, he is one of the experts in the industry and in his field, and I'm very grateful that he's giving up his time to go through this presentation with us. Thank you so much, Peter. The floor is yours. You should be able to share your screen if you want to run the presentation, because then it will be easier for you.
Could you put up the presentation for me, please?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Where is it?
All right.
I'm getting there, sorry.
That's all good. Thank you for the great introduction, by the way.
Is it shared? No.
Not yet. Peter, your volume is quite low. You're going to need to speak right into your microphone, please.
Nah, my mic's a little far from my face, that's all.
Yeah, there we go. That's better.
There we are.
Are you winning, Angela?
I don't know where my... Oh, there we go. Sorry. Got it. Okay. There we go. Yeah.
Perfect.
So there we go. That's just the front page. And these are the topics that we're going to be covering. This is just for reference. We'll see as we go through. And Dean and Peter, I will pass over to you.
All right. So like Angela said, this is pretty much an overview of tariffs as they're applied for the 2021 financial year. There have been a couple of changes which need to be noted by the JPOMA members, but I'll get to those as we go through. Our first stage is the prepaid residential. This will only really affect the JPOMA members if your prepaid tariff that you apply to your tenant billing is based directly on the CoJ approved figures. What we've generally done at UTF is keep our increases in line with CoJ's monthly increases, and we make sure that our tariff applied is still within line of the prepaid tariffs published by the City of Johannesburg. They very distinctly state in their bylaws that there isn't actually allowed to be a tariff that's over and above what has been approved by NERSA, and any of the tenants would be able to apply directly to NERSA if we were overbilling, and that would be quite a process to get out of under oath. All right, then the next is our residential conversion single phase. This is the 60 amp. You also have an 80 amp, which is the next stage. You'll notice over here at the bottom of the page, we have a 400 unit and a 700 unit cost. For most of the residential portfolio within JPOMA, the average consumption per unit is around 400 kilowatt hour. The 700 kilowatt hour would be on the highest end, and we put that in there to show what kind of effect the additional steps have on the total billing per unit going forward.
Peter, should we ask questions as we go, or would you rather just get to the end and then we ask questions afterwards?
Oh, it's best to ask questions as you go.
Do you mind if we go back to the
so
prepaid?
If you have a question.
Yeah, could we go back to the prepaid, if you don't mind? Can you just comment on the token fee? Because, you know, a typical tenant will go and buy a voucher at a prepaid vendor, and they're paying beyond just the kilowatt hour charge. As shown here, they're also paying a token fee, which leads to some confusion in terms of how many kilowatt hours they actually achieve for a certain denomination value. Can you maybe just comment on that in terms of the cost elements for a prepaid, you know, tenant?
True. As we all know, the City of Joburg have tried to put through a service charge onto the prepaid, which was successfully fought against, thankfully. But there are a few hidden charges that come through on your prepaid billing every month. The network surcharge in excess of 500 kilowatt hour, which is 6 cents per kilowatt hour, comes through, as well as no, I've lost it. Okay. Yes, there are times when a token fee is applied by a vendor in order to cover the cost of their service in supplying the infrastructure.
And Peter, would this tariff apply to a municipal prepaid meter, and how does it affect private prepaid meters?
The municipal prepaid meter doesn't have a service charge that is raised. The token charge itself is included as part of their tariff determination year on year. Thankfully, with the resellers prepaid, we are given the opportunity to recover the cost of the service provider and infrastructure maintenance as part of our tariff applications and the tariffs that we raise to our tenants. If you've had a case in the housing tribunal, you will have noted that they have passed rulings to that effect that we've been able to use to successfully defend claims of being overcharged for the prepaid tariffs. Are there any other questions in regards to the prepaid?
Anyone else? Okay, let's carry on.
All right, so we'll go on to the residential tariffs. It should be noted that the City of Joburg apply the steps at 500, 500, 1,000, 1,000, and above 3,000 in relation to a standard month, which is your 30.43 days. So when they apply it to the billing, if your billing period is 21, 28, 60 days, they will adjust the total value of each step in relation to the number of days in that billing period. So if you are billed over a 35-day period, they'll take the 500 divided by 30.43 times 35 to give you a new step value. So the total kilowatt hour that falls within that bracket that has now been revised in relation to the number of days in the reading period is what you'll be charged each of these tariffs. It is not clearly stated anywhere on the tariff at all, but it is applied to every billing and has been applied to every billing since the City of Joburg took over billing directly from City Power and Joburg Water. All right, that is also one of the reasons why this residential tariff, the 60 and 80 amp, when applied to a high density building, is applied per unit and not as a single bulk supply for all the consumption that is used within that property. It allows us to apply the tariff per flat and bring all of our consumption within that first step band, which saves us in the inner city a decent chunk of money.
Peter, if I might just jump in here with a question real quick. Good afternoon, everyone. Sean Streeton here. So I just wanted to check. So Peter, the time period of the reading is often inconsistent. It might be, as you said, 28 days, 35 days, etc. And what you're saying is that the city actually, or let me rephrase that, you are likely to consume greater amount of power over a longer period. So if your reading period is shorter, you should technically fall in a lower sort of block. But if the reading is longer, you'll fall in a higher block. So you're saying that the reading period does not negatively impact the billing at all?
Not at all. They actually adjust the step value in line with the reading period that is applied.
Thank you for that clarity.
Yeah. So if they are billing 500, that 500 is in relation to an average month, 30.43 days. Okay, then we have the 80 amp. 80 amp is slightly more expensive from a cent per kilowatt hour basis, but your I got that the wrong way around. The service charges and capacity charges differ between your 80 phase, your 80 amp and your 60 single phase, but the tariff supplied per block remain the same. If we can move on to the resellers tariff, this is where I have actually done a little bit of research. With the latest increase in the resellers tariff, either as a 5-step or as a 3-step tariff, which is where the confusion comes in. On the published City Power tariffs on their website, they have a 5-step resellers tariff. And on the approved City of Johannesburg tariff booklet, they have a 3-step resellers conventional tariff. Either way, the conventional residential tariff does now work out about 10% cheaper than your resellers tariff. So if you as a JPOMA member are being billed on a resellers tariff, it would be suggested that you look into how much longer you have left on the resellers term, because that resellers is on application that needs to be renewed every 12 months. I would suggest not renewing that and falling back to a residential conventional tariff, because at the end of the day, that will allow you to reduce your total electricity cost to the city.
Peter, sorry, question.
Yes.
Sean again. So was this an anomaly that creeped in? Because, you know, a residential reseller should obviously build at a lower tariff than a straightforward residential. So is that an oversight? Was it intentional? What is your opinion?
It's entirely an oversight on their part. When City Power built separately from the City of Johannesburg, they did not apply a residential tariff per flat to a main landlord. So if you had a single point of supply, you would be billed at a single tariff for the total consumption, regardless of how many units are fed. And with the move over to the City of Joburg, the City of Joburg pulled in an aspect of the Joburg water tariff that said that the incoming supply would now be divided by the number of units within the high density building, and then the tariff would be applied to that split per unit. And so that has allowed us to use the conventional residential tariff in place of the resellers tariff. And it was only up until this current increase that the resellers tariff was more beneficial to us as residential landlords against the conventional residential tariff. So basically, it is a legacy that's been pulled through because the legislators at the City of Joburg are too lazy to actually reword the tariff structure that they received from City Power when they did the initial amalgamation, when they came together under one billing umbrella.
I mean, Peter, is there an opportunity to escalate that? Because the logic at the time was that the high density buildings would get a benefit because of reading sub-meters and maintaining the reticulation in the building, which obviously has a cost.
Yeah.
And that was the rationale for the reduced tariff. Now, I mean, that logic still stands. So if you're saying it's an error, then how does that error get escalated to potentially be addressed?
I am honestly not too sure. That would have to go to the person responsible for applying the tariff. That would either be within the City of Johannesburg itself, or we would have to go through City Power. I'm still not too sure which side of that partnership to speak to, but I am looking into it, and once I have a better understanding of the route that needs to be taken, then I will share my findings with Angela, and she can share with the rest of the JPOMA board.
On that note as well, Peter, I think JPOMA was very instrumental with ERASA to get these resellers tariffs implemented. So we will definitely work with ERASA to try and get this resolved, because, I mean, the point of the resellers is that it is supposed to be cheaper for property owners.
It is, and like I said, up until the current tariff increase, it has been.
Yeah. Okay, so that is something that JPOMA, along with Peter and ERASA, will look further into. Definitely.
Yeah, I am also on the board of ERASA, so
okay.
I will raise it with them as well.
Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide, and then this is just the example of what we were talking about. So this is what City Power published on their website, and this is what City of Johannesburg published on their website. So you can see there's a huge difference between the two. And then I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Angela. Let me just quickly get back to where I am. So in effect, you're looking at a 1.2% variance between the total cost on your residential resellers on a 3-step and your residential resellers on a 5-step tariff base. From what I can see, the only reason why the council would move to a 3-step base in place of a 5-step base is that they're able to sneak in a slightly higher tariff increase. Because if you compare the average tariff of the first 3 steps, which runs up until that 500 kilowatt hour, and the 500 kilowatt hour tariff that was used in the previous billing, that tariff increase, that percentage increase, is above and beyond the 6.23 that was actually approved. And that has been touted as the reduced tariffs that the government of unity within the City of Johannesburg municipality has so graciously given us. There were a lot of issues in this current budget run that have now started coming out of the woodwork and that will need to be discussed further with the City of Johannesburg, especially when it comes to residential resellers and the residential conversion, the residential conventional tariff structures. All right, but we can move on from that. We go on to the seasonal. This is a purely optional tariff that can be applied on application. There is a small fee that needs to be paid in order to facilitate the tariff change. There is a slight savings that can be had in moving from a conventional residential tariff over to a seasonal tariff, but it does require you to more closely maintain your consumption in the winter and summer months in order to actually see that savings, because the 400 that we have here as the average units is of course going to be affected by the demand profile for the months of winter and the months of summer. So you'll see a slightly lower consumption in the summer months, slightly higher consumption in the winter months. And if you don't control your consumption in that winter period, the overall cost can run away from you. So it is workable from a savings perspective if you're able to effectively manage your winter load. So I would say that any members, utility managers who are looking at moving over to a seasonal tariff should do a sort of cost-benefit analysis of how the consumption is currently being managed within those billing periods of winter and summer. Right,
Peter,
yes.
Sorry for interjecting again, Sean here. Just a quick one. I think just for the members' benefit, a lot of members are...
have we...
I'm sorry, did I mute myself? Sorry, guys. So Peter, I was saying many of our members are probably running central hot water heating systems throughout their various portfolios. And obviously during winter months, you find that demand escalates dramatically. And so would you then recommend for portfolios, running central heating systems to go onto the seasonal tariff? What would your recommendation be there to members?
If they're on a central hot water system and they want to move over to the seasonal tariff, they need to be sure that their hot water system is running as optimally as possible. So they would have to ensure that all their lagging is placed. They would have to make sure that their their equipment has been serviced and kept up to date, and in any possible way prevent heat loss on a system, because any amount of heat loss that you get increases the kilowatt hour input needed to reheat that water. So it could be something that could be applied, but as I've said before, you'll need to manage that winter demand, and you'll need to ensure that any application of electricity usage within the property is recorded and monitored in order to ensure that you see that savings.
Brilliant. Thanks, Peter. I'm sure the members will find that advice quite valuable.
All right, and then we can drop down the residential three-phase seasonal. Again, seasonal tariff, three-phase supply for the 700 units. We can gloss over this. It has the same talking points as the previous slide. So next is our residential time of use. This is one of the tariff structures that I find most interesting, especially given the current environment of moving to sort of more sustainable solutions. If you're able to supply electricity during your peak times from a sustainable solution and only draw your power from council in the standard or off-peak periods, there is a substantial saving to be made on your monthly billing in relation to the tariffs that are currently being applied. But much like the seasonal, it's all dependent on the efficiency of the sustainability product that you have in place, as well as the periods in which that product is running. But I think this will definitely become a more standard tariff over the years as we start moving away from what has become a very unreliable electricity grid in the past few years. So that's something the JPOMA members might want to note. All right, and then we can move to the next one. It's business prepaid. All right, so your business prepaid, much like your residential prepaid, has been increased in line with the recommended tariff increases. The network surcharge of 6 cents per kilowatt hour applies to all bands of a business consumption. There is no free 500 kilowatt hour basis that's applied here, and all business and large power users are subject to a 2% surcharge on business rates, on any business rand value, and that is directly from the Municipal Systems Act, which is why they've included that as part of the business charges. We can move on to business conventional. This, much like residential conventional, it is applied to the steps. The number of days in the month are also applied. The business charge is best applied to buildings with a supply capacity of less than 100 kVA, which for most of our properties is below the band. This is the tariff that you would raise to commercial tenants within your portfolio. It's interesting to note that you can recover the service and capacity charges as well from your commercial tenants within your buildings, because unlike the residential billing, you're allowed to recover this full cost from your commercial tenants. It isn't as legislated as the residential sphere. All right, and then we can pop to the next one, business conventional resellers. I haven't actually checked whether or not this, like the residential charges, has now come in as at a higher cost than the conventional business billing. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Actually, let me just quickly check. Okay, it does still come in cheaper. All right, it does still come in cheaper on this one. So if you are a registered reseller for business units, this is the tariff that you would be billed on, and for the moment, it is still beneficial for sellers of electricity to the business sphere to be on a business reseller's tariff. All right, and then we can move down. We're going on to water tariffs now. So before we carry on, are there any questions in relation to the electricity tariffs?
I don't have any questions that have come in through the questions and answer window, but maybe we can just take this opportunity to speak to our directors and just give us an idea of how these new electricity tariffs have affected your buildings and your business. Maybe we just start with Nick. Would you like to just come in and maybe just give us what you've noticed in the last month since the new tariffs have been implemented?
Yeah, Angela, thank you. Yeah, I think it's probably still too early to note whether any of these specific tariff increases have had any impacts. And obviously we're in extraordinary times, so there's a whole bunch of other things that are having massive impacts on our businesses at the moment. So I think that one of my takeouts at the moment is that a whole lot of the proposed tariff increases that we saw have not been implemented. Peter, you've highlighted that already. And so in many ways, is actually what's coming through on the bill is the reality that we're facing. Yeah, I suppose it's good and bad news, a mixed bag. That would be my comment, but I think it's too early to tell at this stage on the exact impacts.
Okay. Andrew, would you like to make a comment at all?
For the last couple of years.
Hello?
Not particularly, Angela. Thank you. Not at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we don't have any questions or anything, so Peter, we can move on to water.
All right. Then we look at the water tariffs. These are applied on a slightly smaller band because of the total water usage that gets raised. The city have raised the free 6 kiloliters. They've returned that back to the current tariffs, which does work out as beneficial if you're able to maintain a cost per unit below 15 kiloliters. Angela was kind enough to do all the necessary graphs and data capture for that in order to do the proof of concept. So thank you, Angela, for that. The conventional water restrictions is not something that that has come into play in the recent past, but given our current climate crisis, it is something that needs to be noted and taken into consideration, because at any point where the water levels become restricted, these tariffs should come into play, and they escalate quickly. The challenge that they're having in Cape Town now is they instituted water restriction tariff increases in order to reduce usage of water, which did work. It had the desired effect, but now they're sitting with those tariffs in place, and people are complaining that it's too high given the fact that they've had rainfall. So it's easy for the council to increase their tariffs. They are more hesitant to decrease them afterwards. So if it does get to a point where these water tariffs are increased due to water restrictions, we will just have to be sure that once that restriction period is over, that we have the right contacts at council to ensure that that tariff comes back down.
What does WDM stand for, Peter?
WDM is a water demand management levy, and that has come in recently. 2017 it was introduced. It is basically an infrastructure levy per dwelling unit. So in our high density buildings, this 26.52 is multiplied by the number of units that the council have on record for your building, and that is applied to your water billing every month.
And what do you consider as a reasonable average in the UTF portfolio in terms of water consumption?
In terms of water consumption, let me just, I would say around about 15 to 18 kiloliters per unit is the total consumption. So we're still sitting within the band where the tariff has allowed us to make a decent savings in comparison to the same period last year. But as Nick mentioned, there are also other factors that we need to take into consideration when doing our comparisons year on year for our water consumption and our water costs.
Can I, Rennie here, can I ask a quick question on this? So if a tenant uses below the 6 kiloliters, there's no charge for that. Would they then still get charged the 26 Rand 52?
The 26 Rand 52 is much like a basic or capacity charge on the electricity.
So that should apply irrespective.
Yeah, it is applied regardless of the consumption used.
Right.
And the argument is that you have that point of supply, and because that point of supply is being made available to you, the demand management applies.
And it'd be reasonable, Peter, to charge that back to the tenants added on the meter reading and consumption?
Yes. If you build your tenants on a consumption point of view, if it is a metered reading, you can raise your water demand levy as part of that cost.
Thanks.
Right.
Okay. Peter, we're going to have to move things up a little bit quicker because we've only got half an hour to try and get through everything else. So no pressure.
That's all. Luckily, the water tariffs are pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
If we move down to the next, it's the business unit. Oh, sorry, prepaid.
Domestic.
I'm way ahead.
Okay.
Sorry. All right, so domestic prepaid, I'm not too sure how many members in the portfolio actually have prepaid water meters installed. From our end, we roll them out to our commercial tenants on application, with that cost being covered as part of the original fit out of the stores. Then the water tariffs as created by the City of Joburg are applied, as well as the administration cost from MeterMate, who are our service provider. If you are applying prepaid, then of course this is the band that you would use as your point of reference when determining the tariff to be raised. Okay, we can move to the next.
Peter, sorry, just a quick question. Apologies for the interruption. Just who sets the tariff on prepaid water meters? Does the landlord set those tariffs, or does the city set the tariffs on the prepaid water meters?
It's a little bit of a gray area there, because unlike the electricity, where it is so incredibly well regulated, the water tariffs themselves are not. So they apply the City of Joburg tariff as a guideline, but you are not constrained by a legal barrier to charge that tariff to your tenants.
So I suppose the question is, what do we do? Do we obviously charge in line with council? I mean, I know you've got pretty strong views about charging over the set tariffs.
No, there are tariffs set by the City of Joburg, and we need to try and ensure that we don't profiteer off of our tenants. And as such, we keep our water charges in line with what council has raised as a tariff, so that we can at least recover the expense of supplying that water to the tenant.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Peter.
Okay, we can move down to mixed use. Okay, so the mixed use water consumption for a multi-purpose property, it should be noted that if you have a single water meter feeding a multi-purpose property, the water through that meter will be charged at a business rate for the entire building. If you would like to move over to a business rate just for your commercial property, you need to ensure that there are separate supplies to the ground floor commercial or whatever portion of your building is commercial, and a separate line must run to your residential units. The separate line will then be billed at a water tariff for the number of units that are applied to, and the commercial will be billed on their business tariff. And I think that's just something that needs to be noted.
Peter,
How does that pertain to mixed use, Peter? So if you've got two bulk meters, one for commercial, one for residential, where does the mixed use tariff come in?
The mixed use tariff as it stands here is not necessarily applied to multi-purpose properties. It's a newer tariff that's coming in relation to pushback from business that have multi-purpose properties where they don't want to actually cover the cost of splitting the line.
So you could achieve this tariff even with one bulk meter to a mixed use building, but I suppose there must be percentages of residential versus commercial, etc., that would apply.
Exactly. Unfortunately, I haven't done a lot of research into the impact that the mixed use tariff has on the total consumption, because the majority of the UTF buildings already have split supplies in place.
Peter, we have a question here from Mark. He wanted to know, did the year-on-year increase of 6.6% on water take into account the 26.52 Rand charge per unit?
The 26.52 Rand is basically considered as a tariff within the greater scheme, so that was also increased by the 6.23%.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, let's go to the next one.
All right, then we have industrial and commercial. For the members who have commercial units on the ground floor at their properties, the water tariff for your commercial would apply. It is relatively high, and depending on the water use of the tenant within that space, it can become rather expensive. So it is your discretion whether or not to apply tariffs as they are here, or whether to apply a lower tariff to the tenant given the market that we're in. Okay, then we move down to the sewer tariffs. Thankfully, these are pretty straightforward. You can apply for a sewer tariff that is charged alongside your consumption. This generally works out a fair deal more expensive than the fixed rate per unit that's currently applied. The per kiloliter consumption you can see at the bottom here is incredibly high. The private domestic. All right. There's not very much I can say on this. The tariff for the sewer is pretty straightforward. It covers the infrastructure cost for removing that wastewater from your building, and then of course processing.
Peter, sorry again to just pop a question in straight here, just for members' benefits. We see the 9% reduction in residential sewer charges per unit, which is obviously a welcome relief. Can you talk to us about anything or any reasoning behind that, if you happen to have any knowledge or insight into why that happened?
As to why they reduced the sewer tariff, I don't have a definite answer. My assumption is that the reduction in sewer tariff allowed them to increase tariffs in other areas. And if they had increased their sewer tariff in line with the water, then the costs may have gotten away. They would have gotten more pushback from business and from society in general. So I think that this 9% decrease in the sewer charge per unit was a low-hanging fruit that they could have picked to show the general population that they are willing to reduce tariffs.
Right, and it certainly speaks a little bit more to sort of being pro-poor, you know, because obviously that's a direct relief to every tenant. It's not a huge amount of money, but you know, every rand saved is you know, beneficial to our tenant base.
Yeah. You know, over the last probably 3 years, through JPOMA, we've put in so many representations about this sewerage price, and also, you know, the fact that you can live in Sandton, you know, the huge rent, or live in town, we're struggling to feed your children. Maybe they've taken cognizance eventually. I don't know. We never know. You know, what spurs them to make these decisions. Yeah.
Absolutely, Rennie. I would like to take some, I think I'd like to take some credit for that. I think that to your point, we've chipped away and chipped away as JPOMA.
Yeah, so many times, you know, we've raised it, Nick, at every meeting we could, you know, every presentation we've raised it, the fact, you know. So yeah, maybe it's had an impact. Yeah.
I hope so. Yeah.
Hope so, yeah, hope so. Can I just ask one more question? The term multi-dwelling, just define that a little bit.
Multi-dwelling is, what they're effectively saying is that there is more than one dwelling unit within the sort of stand that is being built.
Like a cluster complex, for example.
Like a cluster complex, for example.
But they specifically separate that from flats. They're not calling flats multi-dwelling.
Multi-dwellings are generally seen as larger with a higher sewer footprint.
Okay.
Because of the way that they're set up, whereas flats generally 1 to 2 bedroom, single bathroom, single kitchen.
Right. Okay. Okay.
All right. And then we can move on to our rates tariffs.
Before we carry on, I just want to, Mark, I see your, I see there are a couple of people who have come through just wanting to confirm the tariff. So I'll just double check those before I send this out. Yeah, I'll look into that. I don't want to delay us any more than we have, but we'll come back to that.
Angela, I see there are quite a lot of Q&As there. I assume you're tracking those, eh?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Anonymous attendee has also put a note here. Unfortunately, there's no name. The CoJ have changed the definition of flat. So the multi-dwelling is also a property that's valued over 700,000. Over
700. That's interesting.
Yes. So thank you to whoever posted that in the questions. That was interesting to know, because I wasn't aware that the City of Joburg had changed the definition of what constitutes a flat.
Perhaps I could just say quickly, and my colleagues tell me that is a huge issue, because while the tariff themselves look quite benign in terms of year-on-year changes, even favorable, because of that valuation criteria shifting, it's actually led to a large number of properties shifting from 250 or 228 into the 443 range based on value, which is obviously almost doubling. So what we're seeing in the sectional title portfolio is that sewer charges have literally doubled with the change, and they've also backdated that principle for 3 years. So we're seeing massive strain on the sewer charges with backbilling and 100% increases on many sectional title complexes.
Okay, thank you for that, Andrew. It's something we'll look into. From an inner city perspective, that thankfully doesn't affect us quite as heavily, but we will take note of it. Thank you for that, Andrew. And we can move on to rates, which is our next tariff. Okay. Rates can be confusing because of the ratio applied, and the easiest way to define it is that the council are relatively lazy. They set a single rate in the rand as a tax for property, and then they turn around and say each different category of property is going to be billed in relation to that single rate in the rand. So that rate in the rand is set for your residential property as 1 at 1, and then any other property category is billed in relation to that residential rating. I know that Nick has been very vocal in the fact that the rates increase that has been applied both last year and this year is unnecessary in light of the increased valuations that took place in 2018, and I 100% agree with him there. What they should have done is backdated the rate in the rand to a lower value to ensure that the rates being charged were in line with what had been raised prior to 2018. Nick, if you have any comment that you want to put in here, it would be appreciated.
No, thanks, Peter. I think you've highlighted that fact. Yeah, nothing to add other than obviously the 4% increase is, in the light of things, gratefully received.
Yeah, it should be noted that the city is currently in the process of finalizing their next rent roll. So your utility department should be looking into the valuations for each of the properties that you have to ensure that you can supply the correct documentation now to council to ensure that when the rent roll is released again in 2022, that the value that appears on that rent roll is correct, because the appeals process is an onerous process to go through. At the moment, they're still sitting with another, I think, 4,000 or 5,000 outstanding objections from the 2018 roll, which are likely only to be completed after the release of the 2022 roll. So it's something that could be taken into consideration. The valuations now can actually be given through to the rates department with all the necessary documentation in order for them to ensure that the right value is linked to the roll when it's released in 2022.
Peter, if I may just offer a sort of a comment there. Peter and I had a very interesting discussion about this recently, especially with the 2018 roll. And one of the recommendations that Peter made was not just to appeal against the valuations which appear to be out of sync. You should actually raise an appeal on all your valuations, which would then potentially give you an opportunity to defend every single valuation by the city. Whereas if you don't raise an appeal on every single valuation, they could come back in the future and perform a reassessment, which you are then more likely to have to accept. Is that correct, Peter?
Yeah, they do supplementary valuations. That's more to include new developments that have come in within the rent roll period. But a supplementary valuation can come and bite you if you're not careful. So it is better to query your valuation when it's received on the rent roll, so that that can effectively be put down in stone. This is the value of your property for the next 4 years.
Great, thanks, Peter.
Okay, and then we move on to refuse. Thankfully, refuse is pretty straightforward. It's generally raised per stand, and that is based on the value of the property itself. The newer section that's come in is on the left here. It's non-sectional titled properties with multiple living units. Thankfully, that has not been applied to any of our accounts as yet, but it is something that needs to be noted because it is a newer tariff category that has come in with the current tariff document. So this would apply to high density multi-unit properties in order to account for the increased refuse generated from those properties. But as you can tell, the 92 Rand per unit per month could very easily outstrip the average cost of 368 Rand per month that we get currently charged for our refuse removal from council. If, of course, you don't have a refuse service provider in place. And then of course industrial and commercial rates for refuse don't necessarily apply to residential properties. However, if you do have a commercial property, you'll see that the total tariff increase is actually below the mean average, 5.2%. So these will, of course, these are the rates that will be raised. All right, and then the last point is applying for the resellers tariff. Okay, there we are, the Q&A and reply. Applications for reselling tariff with City Power are relatively straightforward. You fill in the application form, you bring in a list of your prepaid meters that have been linked to each unit within the building, prepaid or postpaid, your decision, as well as an affidavit confirming the number of units within your property. Now in the time of COVID, you are able to just email all those documentation through to City Power. They will apply a fee in order to facilitate the tariff change. And then once that tariff has been changed over, it will remain in place for 12 months, at which time you need to reapply for your resellers tariff. All right, and that will be all. Are there any questions?
Peter, maybe just a point. Have you put bulk test meters into all UTF buildings? So would you have a bulk meter that you are using to track and test the council billing?
Yes, it is highly advised to ensure that you have bulk metering in place across your portfolio. Because if you do not have that bulk metering infrastructure in place and there happens to be a fault with a council meter, you will be unaware of it unless you have a great understanding of the full electrical consumption of your building. I find that having the bulk meters in place is invaluable, not only from monitoring consumption and cost of sales, but also in dealing with council queries, where you have a separate value that you can use to confirm the billing that should be applied to your property.
And Peter, do you want to say a few words just about, you know, dealing with council queries, how to escalate them? I mean, how have you got such great results to clear all the UTF queries? Is it just because you know the detail of where the query is arising, or how do you get those results through the council panel?
It's a bit of both. I have the unfortunate luck of having to deal with the City of Joburg, and I have had to deal with them for the past 10 years. And the one thing I have noted is that at the end of the day, you are dealing with people, and people don't like being shouted at. There are processes to be followed, and if you follow them diligently and maintain a sort of calm demeanor, then you will eventually come out the other end with the result that you're looking for. It does help to go into council with a good knowledge of your tariff structure, the tariff that should be applied, as well as all the necessary documentation needed to ensure that your query flows quickly. If you have an estimation, for example, you would need to go in with a current date stamped photo of the meter, and that will help facilitate getting an actual reading applied to your account. If you have a billing, an issue where an incorrect meter is linked to your account, then you'll need to ensure that you log that query, that when the City Power Tech or Joburg water technicians come out to site to verify that you're there, to confirm they've been on site on this day, they took these photos, they have confirmed. And then it's just a matter of communication. You can't log a query and then expect them to do the work without any kind of follow-up. That has to be done diligently. So keeping track of Angela, looks a bit confused. Keeping track of your queries is the best way to get them completed, and never assume that that once you've logged a query, that it will be sorted out. It's something that you need to keep pressure on council to get done. And if push comes to shove, unfortunately, the legal route can also be taken.
You diligently follow that written complaint, written appeal procedure, the bylaw procedure, Peter, as you go.
Exactly. There is a defined query process and points where escalation can take place. And I have found that if you follow that and maintain a level of patience with the red tape and bureaucracy that you have to deal with, that eventually you can come out the other end with the result that you want. And at the end of the day, they are legislated to bill you as per the metered readings at the approved tariff. And any other result on the account is incorrect.
Angela, can I pose a question?
Absolutely.
Peter, the one thing I was a little bit confused on when you were on the refuse table of the presentation, you mentioned that introduced this new tariff that we're finished on before I really understood it. That 90-odd rand, that applies to what? To non-sectional title, it said?
It's non-sectional title properties with multiple living units. So from my understanding,
what tariff would now be applicable to our inner city properties?
From my understanding, this would actually apply to high density units like the ones that we manage within the inner city. I haven't seen this tariff applied to any of my refuse billing as yet. Yeah. But it is something that that needs a little more investigation because it could definitely increase our refuse cost by a substantial percentage if it is applied to the sort of multi-dwelling buildings that we manage.
Yeah, and your basic up to 350 is exempt. I guess, you know, something like a sectional title unit, it's easy to determine the value. Are they applying averaging to refuse as well or not? If you take number of units in a property?
Not at all.
To get to an average
price?
Not
at the moment. I think one of the reasons why they've built in this non-sectional title property multiple living unit tariff is directly as a result of the fact that we have these multi-million rand valued buildings with multiple units, and they're only able to recover 368 rand from that one stamp, even though the volume of waste being generated by that building is much higher than the suburban 2 wheelie bins that you would have once a week.
But now, would they not be charging, I mean, if your property is worth millions, would you not be charging that 368 per unit?
No, that 368 is based on the value of the stand.
Value of the earth, okay. Right.
Pete, I see a question here from Stanley. Sorry, Angela, if I'm over-moderating. But it's a very important question, and it's a road that we've been down. And thankfully, we haven't spent too much money on legal, and we have won most of our matters with cost. But Pete, when would you say, so the question here from Stanley is, when should you take legal action? At which point do we say, listen, we've had enough, we're going legal?
I think it's once you have escalated your query to the head of department for the query that you're working with. So if you have a water query and you've supplied the readings and you've taken the photos and you've gone all the way through to head of metering or head of billing at Joburg Water, and you still haven't gotten the outcome that you require, then you can start the legal process. And that legal process starts with the letter stating, you know, we have followed steps X, Y, and Z. We have come to this point with no resolution, and should we not have resolution within a certain time frame, we will institute further legal action. I have found that I would say 90% of the cases where we have had to resort to legal action generally stop at that letter, where they realize, okay, no, we need to get this sorted. But those are for the smaller issues. The larger, what I call legacy issues, Those ones we've had to take legal, but that's in relation to the purchase of properties where the meters billed on the accounts were not the meters on the property when we did the purchase. So there are external circumstances in that required us to go legal, because there was nobody with the expertise within City Power to actually come to us with an answer. Even though we were able to supply all of the data from our bulk readers, our bulk meters to them, they still wouldn't come to the table and correct our billing. So we had to go legal with that. But for the most part, if you have your bulk consumption as a check in place, if you have photos of both your bulk check meters and your council meters, most council queries can be resolved within 3 to 6 months.
Thanks, Pete.
Okay, so we've got Anonymous again. I don't know if it's the same Anonymous. They've said, we often experience that invoice available on the websites have months missing. So in other words, council issues 2 invoices in 1 month and doesn't load the second invoice onto the website. When the new one arrives, it has a different opening balance. Would Peter have any knowledge on these issues?
Yes, I would. Great question. When working on the e-services website, if the council have made any kind of an adjustment on the invoice for a month, that invoice won't appear on the e-services website. It is a technical issue that they are working on correcting, but it does mean that the opening and closing balances of one invoice then won't be the same. In that case, you would have to phone council directly, phone into the call center and request a copy of that statement that was missing. If they're unable to assist you from the call-in center, then unfortunately you'll have to go in and speak to someone in person, especially if the statement is still locked and under investigation. Because the only reason it isn't raised to the services is if they are confirming billing effectively.
Then someone would like your contact details. I don't know how comfortable you are sharing your details. He's not available. UTF will hold on to him. So if you're looking to try and employ Peter, it's not going to happen. But I'm sure that, I don't know, I imagine that they've got a complicated issue that they would like some advice. I don't know how you feel about that.
If it's an advice, if they want to ask questions, they can email me at peter@UTF. Angela, you can make that available with the presentation. I'm willing to answer questions. I can't guarantee that I'll come back to you immediately. I do unfortunately keep myself relatively busy with internal business, but I will try and answer the questions to the best of my ability.
Okay, great. Then Stan again said, shouldn't the cost of refuse be cost per bin? So I don't know what your knowledge is.
Yeah, in the perfect world, yes. Unfortunately, that's not the case. They've raised the refuse charge per stand back from when Pick It Up was still subsidized by council and was in effect still profitable. But now you're sitting with this massively underfunded entity that is responsible for removing all of our waste. And if you've tried to get bins out of council, you will know how incredibly inefficient that part, that division of council it is. Council is. Pick It Up itself is dying a not so slow death.
Peter, if I may just, for the benefit of members, I know that we had some challenges in procuring bins, and then at some point you did have quite a lot of success in procuring bins. Do you just want to talk to the members about, you don't have to give us all your IP and secrets, but maybe if you could tell us how you did what you did, how did you, was it persistence, patience? Obviously,
a little bit of both, and with a dash of luck thrown in. It's instead of just putting in the request for a bin and then just leaving it and hoping that a bin pitches up, we actually got in contact with the depot manager in Norwood. We said, we're looking for bins. Here's our reference number for the bins we have requested. And we carried on following that up on that every week or so. And as soon as bins were made available, because we had developed that relationship with the depot manager, we were able to annex a bunch of those bins for our buildings in order to replace the bins that had either been stolen or damaged over time. So it's just persistence, patience, and making sure you have the relationships with the right people and the right departments.
I mean, that is the secret to City Council, is continuous follow-up. Don't assume for 1 second that someone will just resolve your issue or help you out. You have to continuously follow, chase. It should be a daily reminder, follow up. And that's just, I mean, that's the reality of City Council at the moment.
Was there any progress in the pick it up monopoly where it is possible in certain cases to outsource refuse removal to cheaper, more reliable private systems?
You can bring in your own service provider to remove the waste from your property. You will still be liable for that refuse removal cost per stand, as is gazetted in the tariffs. We have found that for the majority of our buildings, the pick it up collections generally happen on schedule. For our more centrally based inner city properties, we do have service providers that we've brought in to ensure that that waste is removed regularly. Because unfortunately, the pick it up service within sort of the main center of the inner city is not quite as good as it is on the outskirts.
Thanks.
Thank you. So if there's no other questions, Nick was going to do a little, what do you call it, closing for us, but he had to leave, unfortunately. We have got a question from Vanessa saying, why does City of Tshwane, I think it must, refuse to cancel refuse services on their side? It's much cheaper to appoint a private company.
Yes. The City of Tshwane sees the refuse charge as a tax similar to your rates charge. And whether or not you make use of the service offered by the city, that cost would still apply per stand basis.
Okay.
So Pete, just to clarify, is it seen more as a tax or as an availability charge?
The refuse is on the same band as rates, and it is seen as a tax.
Yeah. Can I just interrupt you? So we've had legal opinion of this several times, I think. We looked at it several times during POMA, because there's a further factor that's at play here, and that is that the issue of prescription. Because on your water and your electricity, the arrears prescribes after 3 years. And we were of the opinion that sewage and refuse should also prescribe, because to us it's a service. You know, you're either using it or you're not using it. But the legal opinion we got is that they are both regarded as what they call a rate. So in the same category, exactly what Peter says, same category as rates. It's not actually a tax, but it's a rate, but it's equivalent to a tax. And therefore, refuse and sewage, they can go back 30 years on. And that was where this whole problem came in, where they were looking to hold new owners liable for past owners' arrears at council, where they could go back and pick up arrears over 30 years and try and bang that onto the new owner. And thank goodness that was overturned. But yeah, so we've had proper legal opinion on this at senior council, and they've confirmed that, as much as it sounds bizarre to us, that both refuse and sewage is a rate and not a service.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Angela, you're still on mute.
Here we go. One more question has come through, and it's from Clive from Trafalgar. My question we picked up that the water meter is broken. When we lodged a ticket with council, the feedback was that they do not have the equipment to replace the meter that was on site. Till now, the meter has not been replaced. The City of Johannesburg municipality is killing us with the estimates on the account. It's nearly close to 3 million. How can we deal with this one? Because City of Johannesburg won't do a fair adjustment on the account. Several calls have been logged, no feedback. What's the best process that one could take?
In a case like this, this sort of proves why having a check meter is so incredibly important. Because of the check meter, you could very accurately gauge what your total water consumption is for the month reading period, and then you could pay your council bill in relation to that consumption use. In the City of Joburg bylaws, they state very clearly that if you have a query on a charge, you should raise that query with the council, but still pay what is due and payable in relation to that service. So with a check meter, you would be able to know exactly how much water you're using. You'd be able to apply that to the tariff and make a payment. Unfortunately, you will still face the risk of receiving pre-termination notices, interest on billing. But if you get to the end of your query successfully and have your meter replaced, you can use your bulk readings to ensure that the billing raised to your account is correct, and you can have the interest and sundry charges from any pre-termination notices reversed as part of that correction. But we're having a very similar issue on our portfolio where meters have been stolen, where dials have been removed. The City of Joburg simply does not have the stock at the moment to replace those meters. And much like, was it Clive has said, they do raise estimations that are above and beyond. My suggestion is to, where you can, pay the account in full if the estimation isn't ridiculous, and where the estimation is ridiculous, log a query so you have that reference number and pay what has been used. Because what a lot of people do is when they log a query, they think that they no longer have to pay the account because it's an outstanding. It's not the case. You still need to pay what has been used on a property. Hopefully that answers the question.
Very, very important. Pay for what you use. It's council uses that as an excuse not to help you if you're not paying. So whatever, if you've been paying 20,000 Rand a month, pay 20,000 Rand until the matter is resolved, if that's what you think your fair usage is. Yeah, they're quite sticklers with that. Okay, I don't see any other questions coming through. Andrew, Rennie, Sean, is there anything that you would like to add before we wrap this up?
I'm fine on my side. Thank you. Thanks for the presentation.
Just thanks very much to Peter and yourself, Angela, for putting the presentation together and facilitating.
And
yeah, greatly appreciate it.
And from my side as well, thanks to the other panelists, Andrew, Rennie, and Nick. Angela and Peter, also thank you for all your hard work and input in putting this together.
Pleasure.
Right.
So this presentation will be loaded up onto the JPOMA YouTube channel, along with all the supporting documents, presentations. I'll even include my Excel spreadsheet so that you can play around with the numbers yourself. And then that'll all be available for you guys as reference documents. Once I have got confirmation on the resellers from City Power, I will also send those out, because at the moment, as we said, we don't know if it's 3 steps or 5 steps. But as soon as I've got clarity on that, I will send that out to everybody as well. Peter, thank you so much for giving up your time. I really appreciate it. It's always so nice listening to you talk. You're so knowledgeable. So I really appreciate that. And yeah, thank you everybody, and thanks for logging in and listening to us. I'm going